Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this BIMCO webcast or webinar on COVID-19's implications for ship management. COVID-19 has proven to be a major challenge to the shipping industry and indeed across the whole world and across all sectors and industries. This is the first time for many years that we have seen shipping affected on such a global scale. And many ship owners find themselves in uncharted waters, so sharing information and lessons learned is absolutely key enabler to improve the safety and the health of our seafarers. To assist us today with this webinar, I have two panelists with me. It's Mr. Matt Dunlop from V.Group, and it's Marco van Rijsinge from Spliethoff. And I will give the word to the two gentlemen to introduce themselves. Matt, please.
Good morning to you all and good afternoon. V.Group is the parent company of V-Ships, and I'm the Group Director for HSEQ and Technical. We operate around 600 ships in technical management and over 300 vessels in crew management of various vessel types, including passenger, tankers, oil, chemical and gas, bulk, container and offshore oil and gas, all operating worldwide. My role is to ensure our 3,000 shore colleagues operating in 60 offices in 30 countries go home safe at the end of each day, and for our 44,000 seafarers to go home safe at the end of their contract. With COVID-19 and with the majority of our office colleagues working remotely and the crew reliefs suspended due to global lockdown, travel and quarantine restrictions, my role has just got more challenging. However, we have good people, systems and processes to manage our way through this difficult time. And I appreciate that those of you on this call have the same challenges. As an industry, we are in it together and all in the same boat. Marco?
All right, thank you, Matt. My name is Marco van Rijsinge. I am the DPA CSO, so the company security officer, designated person. Also involved, we have the Spliethoff Group consists of several companies, most of them manned from Amsterdam, from the Netherlands. We only have 80 ships, so we are a small company in comparison to V-Ships. We are owner, we are operator, we do the crewing and we do technical. Everything is done here in-house. So we are in a way, touched in many ways by this pandemic. We are also trading worldwide. We have general cargo ships, we have heavy lift vessels, we have ro-ro vessels, and we have some semi-submersibles. We're traveling all over the world, so we are facing the same problem in different ways, so to say. It's the same as what Matt says. We are all looking at something that is complete new for all of us. We don't know how to deal with it. Things are changing by the day. The things that we make now can be different in, say, 1 hour, or what we say that is good for, say, Canada will be different for China, for South Africa, can be anything. So I think that's very good for all of us to share information, to share things, to share ideas, maybe even to think about a little bit about the future. It's also for me, I think, very interesting to see how other people think about it, how they deal with it. Jakob?
Yeah, many thanks for that, Marco and Matt. We have decided to divide today's webinar into sort of 4 main topics, and those are onboard precautions, crew change, compliance certificates and documents, and finally technical operations. And towards the end, we will also have a Q&A session, and you can post your questions either via LinkedIn, or if you are on YouTube, you can also post your questions in the YouTube channel. We will have all the questions towards the end in one collective Q&A session. So in the meantime, we'll take the 4 sessions one by one and let Matt and Marco share their wisdom. First of all, on to onboard precautions, and of course this is an area which is extremely important. It's on the top of the mind of the seafarers. How do they themselves avoid getting infected? And it also imposes a lot of restrictions on ship operations and the way the crew can interact together on board the ships. Matt, perhaps you would like to share your experience with this particular area.
Thank you, Jakob. As you will appreciate, the global situation with COVID-19 is constantly evolving and new studies provide new advice. Therefore, we issue guidance to our shore and seafarers on a regular basis, just to make sure that we are current. Our policies and procedures have been created in compliance with the World Health Organization, International Chamber of Shipping, and Intertanko. And we do see this as industry best practice and consolidate the same for ease of reference and use on board. So what are we doing on board our ships? As we've mentioned, crew changes are suspended until further notice, until global travel and quarantine restrictions are lifted. ITF have agreed with IMEC that all crew contracts globally can be extended to the 15th of May, after which there will be a fortnightly review. Therefore, where there is no illness on board, the ship's accommodation can be considered a safe zone. To keep it safe and free from COVID-19, visitors coming on board must be minimized and controlled. So what do we do to manage visits on board? For personnel required to attend on board, such as pilots, authorities, mooring masters, oil majors, class surveyors, etc., we apply the equivalent to Security Level 2 in the detailed ship security plan to control access to the ship's accommodation and ensuring a single point of entry. We also supply COVID-19 PPE to the vessels and at least one infrared thermometer for checking body temperatures. We ensure the gangway lookouts are fully briefed on their responsibilities and duties. We also complete health questionnaires for visitors coming up the gangway, and we test for temperatures. We prohibit visitors transiting crew accommodate areas. As I said, this is a safe and contained environment. For pilots, we try to take them via the outside stairwells to the bridge. Agents and terminal staff are limited to a designated meeting space with the possible direct access to the open deck. Of course, keeping social distancing in mind with 2 meters apart. Considering use of Suez cabins where shore personnel are required to stay on board. And of course, sanitizing the designated meeting spaces or cabins when the meeting or the operation is completed. When we handle provisions for storing and chandlery, i.e. for personnel for which on-board attendance is not required, we've got clear instructions from the chandlers or delivery persons to board. They're not permitted. We arrange the paperwork and payment by email in advance, and where possible, have spares and stores delivered to the dock only. Again, keeping at least 2 meters distance from the shore staff when bringing stores on board. Of course, we have to be mindful of our crew well-being and shore leave, and we need to be mindful of MLC requirements. However, most of our masters take a pragmatic approach by discouraging or stopping shore leave except in an emergency trip to the doctor or dentist. So if we have a suspected COVID-19 case on board, how to prepare and what to do. As responsible managers, we have taken the proactive step of appointing an industry-leading medical management company to provide our managed vessels with 24/7 COVID-19 advice. They are trained physician advisors for remote medical advice in response to crew symptoms of or actual illness through coronavirus infection when remote medical advice at sea is requested. In the worst case scenario, we have specific isolation plans on each vessel. The scope of this plan is to detail the measures to take on board the vessel in the event of a virus outbreak which requires isolation of individuals. And there are 2 simple items to identify on board: the designated isolation room or rooms, the appointed medical officer. The isolation plan is generic in nature and details procedures to adopt for generous virus spread prevention, again following World Health Organization and our physician advisory service advice. Marco, have you got anything that you wish to enhance or add that you're doing?
Well, I think in general, I think 80% of what you say we are also doing. We have made some maybe I can add, give some insight how we have tackled the same problem in the same way, but a little bit different. We have made several protocols for all our vessels. And of course, these protocols, we know that they can change by the day, but at least it gives a sort of uniformity for the people on board. So they know how we want them to deal with the thing. And it also gives them some ammunition, if necessary, if they have to deal with authorities or with other people that try to come on board. We have said the accommodation is a no-go area for non-crew. We have the approach, and we still have, that our crew, because they are at sea and they have been so long in a forced, you can say, quarantine, that as long as they have no fever, they have no symptoms of the COVID or of the corona, they are on the safe side. So the danger comes from the outside. Sometimes that's quite, I hear from our captains, difficult to explain. On the other hand, a lot of authorities, they realize that they are bringing maybe the virus on the ship. So that's what, it works pretty well in most places. So what we do, you also mentioned it, when there is a pilot coming on board, go via the outside stairs. When they are on the bridge, they have to stay away. We use 1.5 meters for the social distancing. If they have touched something like VHF or whatever, it will be cleaned immediately. Of course, for the ships that go for a long stretch, like St. Lawrence River or Mississippi, you have to deal with it in a different way. But actually, I haven't heard any problems on that at the moment. So I think that goes pretty well. But of course, this is something we have to invent ourselves. And we have also seen from a lot of pilot associations already, they have more or less the same requirements. Difficult to have one protocol for, say, loading discharging operations. So that's one thing that we are still working on. We already have something. A lot is already done spontaneously on the ship. So for us, it is, well, easy maybe to compile everything and take all the best things and make one company protocol on that. So that's one thing that we do. And yeah, as I say, it's working pretty well, and it's changing by the day. One other thing that you mentioned, provisions. We also have the same approach, that provisions are brought to the ship, go alongside near the gangway, and we take it up with our own ship's cranes onto the ship. The guys who come always with these large packs of paper, they also have to stay on the outside, so you can do everything near the gangway or on the quay, or at least a place outside accommodation again. Clearance, also quite interesting to see that authorities, sometimes they come on board, but then they will stay on deck or on the bridge wing. Sometimes clearance is done outside the ship on the quay. We even had one case that the agent took all the papers and went to the office of the CBP. It wasn't in the US. So that's also, becoming more and more, it's sort of easier, so to say. The first weeks were for everybody quite, everybody was looking at it, how do we deal with it, etc. And now we have a sort of experience, sort of new procedure on that. What else did you say? What else did we talk about? Managing visits on board. Well, we really try to keep it as minimum, also from the people from the outside, our customers, our surveyors, our people, our own people. Shore leave. It's also our policy, no shore leave at all. A lot of terminals also, they prohibit people to go ashore. So that's quite easy. And actually, what I hear from our seafarers, there's also not so much need for shore leave at the moment. It's really the world upside down. When they are in port, they want to stay on board. And when they have to be relieved, they want to stay on board. It's completely different than it was, say, 4 months ago. So that's a little bit what I have to add to Matt's story, Jakob.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marco and Matt, for sharing those experiences. Just one question that came to my mind, and that is, obviously, all these extra precautions that have to be taken, procedures have to be written, and you have to cover a lot of different aspects of shipping operation. And if you're a mid-size or large company like yourselves, then obviously we will have the resources to cover this, and you would have the specialist insight and so on. But where do you collect your knowledge? What are the sort of information sites that you use to collect your knowledge and produce all these procedures?
If I can go first, Jakob. Yeah, probably there is too much information right now. Information overload, and we're in a fortunate position where we've got a centralized team that can bring all this together in order to compile industry best practice. As I mentioned, we use the BIMCO website, which is great information, but we also use the World Health Organization, the International Chamber of Shipping, and Intertanko outbreak management plans, compiling it all together to ensure that it's current, practical, and realistic in order to make sure that this is kept updated. But the information that's coming in from various sources is all appropriate, but it is a challenge keeping it together and ensuring that that your policies and procedures are current and fit for purpose. So that's one of our ongoing challenges today. Great information coming in, but just keeping on top of it is a challenge, and I kind of see that for maybe some smaller organizations who don't have the resources available.
Thanks, Matt. Anything to add to that, Marco?
Well, I agree on that there is maybe too much at the moment available. But I think if you look at it, we have the medical part, which is neither of us are doctors, so we need to have the World Health Organization or the national authorities or radio medical advice, all kinds of things. We have the operational part, which is of course the thing that we are strong, that we know about crew changes, about sailing a ship, about maintaining a ship. And these are mainly things that we have say, these are our own procedures, so to say. The medical part is from the outside. They tell us, okay, this is what you should do, what you should avoid. In case you have a suspect person, do this, and this. Isolation, that already said. So that's one thing that is now there. And if, of course, the ideas change, and they're changing by the day, then you have that. Then we have to deal with that. And I think the other ones, yeah, we already have our management system. So we have a tool, we have a thing that we can use for writing procedures, for communicating, for people to know, to familiarize, etc. So that's one thing that we can do in our existing system.
All right. Yeah, thanks. All righty. I think that we've covered pretty well the question of onboard precautions. So I think we should move on now to crewing operations and the related challenges. With the shutdown of airports all across the world and the restrictions imposed on travel between many countries, this is obviously a big challenge. And although IT connectivity and so on may ease the pain of being forced to stay on board for prolonged periods, it's certainly not a complete fix. So how do you go about the whole question of crew changes and the challenges associated with that, Marco?
Well, you call it a challenge, and I would say that's a little bit of an understatement. I call it a big puzzle, because what you want to have the people, yeah, your crew changes. We have 2,500 seafarers, so we have about 1,500 now, actually, as we speak, on our ships. And these people, yeah, some of them just started the contract, but most of them are already halfway, or already at the end, or over the end of the contract. And of course, you want to do the crew change, but the problem is we have not said we have suspended everything. We tried, we still try to get people from the ship and other people back. But of course, one thing is, if you take one off, you have to bring one back. And there it starts. Then you have this complete puzzle with all the things. What port is the shipping? What's the nearest airport? How can you get to the airport? Is there an airline available? Because that also is becoming more and more a challenge. The nationality of the persons. A lot of airlines, they only take their own nationals back to the countries. How do you deal with when you have a Russian or a Ukrainian chief officer, and you want to relieve him with a Dutch guy or with a Filipino guy? Is that possible? When our ships come to Holland, we are in the luxury position that we still can at least relieve the Dutch guys. Well, so there is so much extra that you have to do. You have to look at not only at what we used to do. We talked about certificates, about experience, etc., etc. So you could take this chief officer and relieve him with the other one. Now you have to take so many other things into consideration, and it is changing by the day, and that is also a problem. We have to ask, and I'm not from crew department, so I asked them how they deal with it, and they also said, well, we really have to ask for every crew change, we have to go to the agent and start with the agent. Is it possible? Then you go to the travel agency, right, guys? Is it possible we can get the guy from the ship? Can you take him from one point to the other point? And then you have the country of destination, their home country. Is it possible to get in? And the Philippines, at the moment, they have more or less locked Manila, which I think is a very big problem for the whole shipping community. So at the moment we have, and this is the information from yesterday, we have 18 crew in Manila. 8 of them came from the vessel, and 10 of them were on their way, and they are now in this area, and they cannot go home, and they cannot get out of the country. So that's one thing that we are looking at. What else do we have on crew changes? We had a medical, that's an interesting, we had a medical emergency the day before, Sunday it was, so a few days ago, to the Philippines, and that went so smooth. We were really, that was very nice to see that if it's necessary, if there is an emergency, then things are possible. So that's the good thing. Certificates, also a problem now. People are running out of their certificates. So that's one thing that we have to deal with. Training is not done, all is suspended. And at the moment, I must say, there is no port state control, no audits are done. So it is not so urgent at the moment, but of course it will become urgent if this will continue. Internet, I think you already mentioned it. We have open internet, so people can talk with the people, their people at home. It's quite amazing to see that the people want to stay on board, most of them, because when they go to their home country or when they go to another port or to an airport, there is this large risk that you will be stuck somewhere, and that they will put you in quarantine in a hotel room somewhere in wherever it is. So that's one thing. But of course, so even if we have the possibility to relieve the people, sometimes they don't want. And if we don't get a captain off the ship, we won't get another captain on the ship. So that's also one thing that we are facing. It's really challenging.
Thanks a lot, Marco. Matt, will you have anything to add to that?
As I said at the beginning, this is an industry issue, not just V-Ships or Spliethoff. We're all in it together. And one of the challenges that we're facing right now is with prolonged periods of service on board. This will ultimately result in a significant increase in mental well-being issues among our seafarers. And we should also be aware of the negative impact it will have on their families. And such a situation can only jeopardize the safety of the individuals and potentially the vessels they sail on. So therefore, the industry is calling for governments and regulators to recognize the critical role seafarers play in the supply chain and their importance to the safe delivery of food, medical equipment, and energy sources. And what we're focusing on here is to get governments needing to adopt mechanisms which will allow the movement of seafarers to and from vessels and designate them as key workers. So what are we doing about it? And again, communications is very important, being open, transparent, and being regular. And our visit calls with each of our vessels in a structured manner to advise of the latest situation, what we are doing about it, and more importantly, to listen to the crew to understand what more we can do to support them. And these discussions will continue, and as the days and weeks progress without the ability to relieve crew, those discussions will become more challenging. For now, they understand the situation, but in a couple of weeks, the situation's changed.
It certainly will.
Again, with men. Sorry.
Yeah, go on, Matt. Go on, Matt.
So, again, with well-being in mind, you know, as Marco mentioned, we're not doctors or psychologists, so we've sought help from professionals, and we've also launched an employee assistance program for seafarers on board vessels in our fleet. And this program provides a seafarer to free confidential counselling support for any personal and/or life issues that they may have by providing telephone and chat counselling and support from experienced counsellors. And some of the colleagues and peers on this call may be reading in the press about some initiatives that's looking ahead if this challenge continues for weeks and months to come. So we're also looking ahead and working with the key industry players where there is an industry alliance coordinated crew repatriation program being considered as a concept only at this stage. And we need everybody to pull together, all governments and authorities, etc., and the airlines and agents and the like. Some associations are seeing more problems than solutions at this stage. Well, that does not sound very encouraging. It could simply reflect where we are at this point in time and the number of unknowns that exist. We do, however, need to prepare for a long haul, and we'll continue to look at ways we can get the crew relief plans back on track. Jakob?
Yeah, many thanks, Matt. And then I can just supplement by saying that the BIMCO has also been part of the discussions, including with IMO, on the question of designating seafarers as key workers, and that will be absolutely essential if the flow of seafarers is to come back as normal, or as close to normal as possible, of course. We have also been involved with other discussions. You mentioned the one about designating certain airports as hub ports for crew change. This is an interesting concept, but it is also potentially difficult to implement across the industry, and perhaps even more so for the tramper companies. They will have trouble, and there will be a discussion between the charterer and the owner as to who should cover the costs if that aspect is not covered sufficiently by the existing rules and by the charter party. So there are many unknowns that needs to be shone a light on before decisions can be made and before this concept can be developed. But it will be interesting to see, and I certainly hope that BIMCO and other associations are able to convince the countries that the seafarers should be designated as key workers, so that they can be allowed to move in and out of different countries. One question that just came to my mind is the difference between having seafarers on a ship contract and on a company contract, and different payment models. Do they receive pay when they're at home and so on? Has either of you experienced any trouble with the seafarers at home expressing a wish to go to sea and having problems with staying at home and perhaps being cut off from their salaries and so on? Matt?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jakob, and one that's a real challenge. As a ship manager, we're trying to focus on our seafarers on board, but we cannot forget the seafarers ashore. So the seafarers on board are being paid. The seafarers ashore are waiting to be paid, and therefore we need to support them as much as possible with guidance and the likelihood of this rolling out. We're quite limited to what we can do with payments. We rely on our owners, our ship owners, our customers, working with us to see what we can do with standby pay. And basically it's case by case, Jakob, but it's a real issue. We've got a lot of seafarers ashore who are not being paid. They are being kept informed of what's happening. We're trying to support them with well-being, etc. However, when it comes to the finances, we're quite limited, and they're desperate to get back to the ships as soon as this situation improves.
Yeah, one can understand why. Anything to add to that, Marco?
Well, we have most of our seafarers are on company contracts, so they have indefinite contracts. So there is a little bit difference on that, but of course, yeah, then you have to pay them when they are on board, and you have to pay them when they are at home. And yes, it's a little bit double at the moment. But I'm not the crew manager, so I cannot. I don't have the details. So
no, but that's all right. I mean,
yeah.
All right, guys, thanks for that. And I think we now move on to area number 3, which is compliance certificates and documents. And obviously, with all the restrictions in place, it has become increasingly difficult to maintain the certificates and get the necessary updates. So, Matt, how have you experienced this, and how have you managed this problem?
Again, Jakob, another good question. And as mentioned previously, our focus and continued commitment is to protect our colleagues both at sea and on shore, and to ensure business continuity. And this includes maintaining focus on safe vessel operations with certification and commercial acceptances being maintained. We work very closely with flag states and class societies when surveys are coming due in order to commence the dialogue at the earliest opportunity to ascertain if attendances can be done or extensions and dispensations are required. So far, we have not encountered many issues. However, as the global restrictions continue, the challenges will get greater. With regard to experienced issues with port state or even flag state inspections, again, we work very closely with all flag states who understand the position very well that we're in. And with good engagement, there have been no issues with their attendance. However, with PSC or Port State Control, we have no control and have seen several cases of inspectors with no regard or even respect to the situation that we're in, ensuring our vessels a safe place to work and live. Oil majors are pragmatic also. Most don't wish to place their surveyors' safety at risk either. Therefore, we've seen most apply common sense and an extension to the existing acceptances by self-assessment on board to verify SIRES or CDI requirements being maintained, but still some are keen to attend on board. We've seen a little bit of difference between the various Port State Control MOUs. Most of the MOUs, including the Coast Guard, are taking a pragmatic approach in terms of prioritizing inspections. During March at V-Ships, we saw a 15% drop in recorded inspections, and expect that to be more significant when our April figures are prepared next week. We've had a couple of examples, and I don't want to be specific on this forum, where boarding Port State Control inspectors and immigration officers have not fully respected our own board COVID precautions. These examples have been escalated where appropriate and are being resolved. And if there are any Port State Control authorities and boarding officers who may be listening on this webinar, we need your help ensuring our vessels remain a safe place to work and live. Marco, have you got anything to add on this one?
Well, yeah, especially on the last thing that you said, I fully agree on that. And I must say that we had this experience, as I said, we have this accommodation, the no-go area, and 95%, I think, of the authorities, they comply with that. But still, sometimes you find people, and I don't know what it is, maybe it's bad between the captain and the inspector, there's some psychological problems that people insist to do it in the ship's office, which is in the middle of our accommodation. So sometimes it's very difficult, and sometimes you have some problems that they say, if you don't do what I say, we had this last week, then I will keep your ship 14 days in quarantine, things like that. But of course, as I said, luckily this is an exception, and I hope it stays like that. About the certificates, yeah, we have all ships on Dutch flag, so that's for us, it's quite convenient. We have a statement from NSI, from the Netherlands Shipping Inspectorate, that if not possible, you can extend automatically the certificates for 3 months. We have a few ships that are in this position, so that's one thing that we do now. Class societies is a little bit different. They have a different approach a little bit. So that's one thing. Crew contracts also, of course, a little bit difficult. How do we go with that? Because you will have officially MLC problems if people say have a contract of 4 months and they stay on board for 5 months. But also, at the moment, no real problems with that. Port state control. We have, in general, 200 PSC inspections a year. So roughly four every week. In the last 4 weeks, we had 2 port state control inspections on the whole fleet of 80 ships. So normally it should have been, say, in 4 weeks, 16. Now we have only 2. One in Canada, which was quite interesting to see because this was announced and we told Transport Canada, can't you wait, it's not necessary, but for some reason they wanted to come. Then we had, and this is great, I have pictures of that. We have agreed with the port state control that the guy would not enter the accommodation. So they put a table, you know, the door from the bridge wing, they opened it, they put a table there. The captain was sitting on the inside. The port state control guy was sitting on the outside. And that's how they did the port state control. So he could give the paperwork. And then the port state control man said, okay, I want to see engine room. So the captain went down to the engine room, took some pictures, brought up the record books, etc., etc. So it was quite interesting. And I might suggest maybe we can keep this for the future as well for port state control, if any port state control people are listening to this. The approach, yeah, as I said, we only had 2. So it's very difficult to have a comparison between the different MOUs. And also, I should say that both the port state, only 2, but no deficiency. So that also was pretty good. Okay, Jakob.
Thanks a lot, Marco. And actually, and it's really solutions like that, to practical solutions to practical problems that we need for the industry to adapt, and that I hope that all in the audience can be inspired by. So thanks a lot for sharing that. All right, the next point on the agenda is technical operations and the problems associated with that, and that includes things like getting spare parts in and out, external repairmen, and so on. And Marco, what is your experience with that area?
Well, we were a little bit anxious to put ships in dry dock at the moment because you don't know if they get in, if they will get out in time. So what we try to do is to have the dry docking minimized. The problem is that we are installing all kinds of ballast water treatment systems, scrubbers, and all the things where you need to have the ship dry. Otherwise, you cannot install the overboard valves, etc. So that's really becoming a problem. We try to keep everything in driving distance. So that means from Amsterdam, we have a large warehouse here, we have our main office here, so superintendents, a lot of spare parts are coming from Amsterdam. So that means, say, well, Holland is not a problem. Crossing borders can be a problem. It little bit depends where you go to. If you go to, say, Germany, to Denmark, we have 1 ship in Denmark at the moment. That's not a problem. To the south, we don't know. So what we try is now to keep it as a minimum, but of course you can only do this for a very limited period of time. Also, because the surveys are postponed, we have some time to do that, but this is something that we cannot do for a long time. We have a lot of ships in the Far East, South America. That's not really driving distance from the Netherlands, so we need to find a solution for that. Airplanes are not flying, or maybe they are flying but they don't accept our stuff. We don't know. So that is a thing that is really in progress at the moment. We have the shipboard procedures and everything is there, but you see it as a sort of a next step. We are facing things now that we could easily say keeping on hold for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but it's coming now. So what else do we have? I had a note that the US Coast Guard has offered an extended 2 months extension for installing ballast water treatment systems. So there is also from the authorities, there is some consideration on things already. All right.
Great, thanks a lot, Marco. Matt, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we have got similar experiences as Marco and probably everyone on this webinar. Our focus at V-Ships is to ensure our planned maintenance systems on board are maintained, critical spare parts are on board, and purchase orders in place to replenish stocks. Again, we're fortunate we've got a global procurement team who've got the relationships with suppliers to understand their pain points, and there are delivery and pricing impacts as well. At present, we've not seen too much impact with spares, stores and repairs, albeit that there are restrictions. Dry docking, again, we're experiencing the same challenges as Marco advised. Getting supplies, getting surveyors to the yards, etc., is becoming a real challenge. So, and this is the easy bit, because if this continues, you know, for weeks or months, then our challenge gets greater. Jakob?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Mark. With that, we have come to the end of the initial panel discussion, and we now move into the Q&A session. And I encourage all in the audience to post your questions via the different channels, either on LinkedIn or by using the chat in YouTube. We already have a couple of questions in, and the first one is a question which reads: I saw that a shipping company named LSC has already begun their crew changes with private charters. Will there be something similar for this company anytime soon? And with this company, the questionnaire comes from a V.Group company. So Matt, that's for you.
Okay.
Very specific.
It is very specific. Again, chartering flights is the easy part. Ensuring that the end-to-end process, if you were transferring seafarers from, say, Manila to Singapore, there's a 14-day quarantine period required before the seafarer can get into Singapore. So chartering the flights is easy, and some of our business units within V.Group, we have the capability. The challenges with the local authorities in Philippines and Singapore and other locations around the world to understand their requirements for quarantine and accessibility. For instance, in Australia, they're quite inconsistent. Some states have got seafarers been able to be relieved, and others are not, and therefore that's our main challenge. Yes, there will be chartering flights, but it's more complex than that, and it's the end-to-end process that really needs the detail. It really needs the risk assessment, the local understanding of what we need to do before a seafarer departs his home port, and what we need to do to get him on board the ship. And more importantly, how we get our seafarers to disembark safely, again, possibly going into quarantine. So it's a real challenge. As I said, the Alliance is working with industry partners to address those challenges and specifics about what we can do and where.
Thanks for that, Matt. We have another question in here. With regards to port state control, are there any ports or countries which are more problematic than others? I don't know, Marco, would you have an opinion on that?
Well, as I said, we only had 2 port state controls, so that is interesting to see. And I'm also wondering what it will be like if it will be lifted, if we will have 10 port state controls in 2 days or so, because all the ships are now coming that are due will be overdue by then. So I have no clue. And as I said, until now, there is what I've seen. We had one in South America, which was sort of a classic port state control. The guy went into the accommodation, but he kept his distance. So he also realized that these things were different than they were, say, 4 or 5 weeks ago. The Canada one I already told you. And yeah, we have to wait and see how this will continue. But I have no list of the bad and the good countries at the moment.
And what about you, Matt?
Port state control inconsistencies apply that are not COVID-19 related. And that's been very political.
As an webinar.
You should get a job with BIMCO, my friend.
As an industry, we know where the challenges are, and we're trying to address them collectively as an industry. However, our job is not just to satisfy port state control inspections. Our job collectively is to have safe ships at all times. So therefore, that's the focus. And all we hope for is some respect from our industry peers, such as port state control inspectors, to respect seafarers that is their home for 4, 5, 6 months and beyond, and to respect each other as human beings. And that's the challenge.
All right, thanks a lot. We have a couple of questions regarding the eventuality that a crew member comes on board and he is infected. And the first question is, if any of the crew test positive, how soon can that person be replaced? And will the vessel remain off hire due to employee shortage? Matt?
It's a very good question, one which we have to consider in our contingency planning. First of all, there are no crew changes taking place at the moment, and when they do, and we may have to have an emergency relief for an individual, we try to do COVID-19 testing before the seafarer leaves to go on board the ship. But that's not always possible because of availability in various locations. If there's a COVID-19 positive case on board a ship, again, we work with the local authorities to ensure that seafarer is properly cared for and disembarked in an appropriate manner to the right medical facility. I would hope, again, because we haven't had any, which is fortunate, that the local authorities would respect the seafarer, that he needs professional medical help, and any restrictions that they have locally would be lifted in order to get that seafarer to the right care. But it's a very good question, to ensure that if we have a positive case on board, how do we make sure that seafarer gets to the right help and care? And one that we really need to, as an industry, to resolve. So hopefully it won't happen, but we need to prepare for the worst.
All right, thanks a lot for that answer. And to the aspect about vessel going off hire or not, and if a crew member is sick, well, I think really it's normally if you have a shortage of crew, you ask for dispensation with the flag state, and of course if that is not possible to get that, then it's a different situation. Matt, do you have any sort of additional points on that?
I forgot that part of the question. We have seen, and this is for everyone on this webinar, we have seen situations where a ship arrives at a port for loading or discharging and tenders notice of readiness. Within that notice of readiness, there's the local port health will require a declaration of the seafarer's health on board. And some of the questions within the health declaration may be, have you just come from China? Have you have any seafarers or individuals with cold or coughs or whatever? And if you answer yes, there's a very good likelihood that your ship will be quarantined for a period of 7 to 14 days, and therefore there will be a commercial impact. We've encouraged our masters to report openly and transparently, but also to work with local authorities to ensure that the commercial aspects are managed. Again, pragmatism is required here. But commercial impacts, yes, we've seen ships going to anchor for 14 days quarantine before being allowed in, and there's a real commercial issue that needs to be considered.
Thanks, Matt. And Marco, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think we can wait for the legal battles coming from this for the next 5, maybe 10 years about this, and because there is so much unknown. How shall we consider this pandemic? Is it an act of God? Is it a? It's not like say a tsunami or something like that. So that's one thing that, not for us, of course, to talk about, but it's something that we are going to see. And actually, what Matt also says, sometimes ships have to go into quarantine. But the thing is that, especially on the longer trips, when you're already 12 days at sea, and you do some slow steaming, then you can get to this 14 days. But when you go from, say, from Palma de Mallorca to Genoa, like we do a lot with our yacht carriers, that's only a few hours. So how do we deal with that? When a seafarer comes on board, we also try to do it. Before they go, we ask them, where have you been? Did you feel fever, cold, cough, the whole list, etc. And luckily, but we should touch wood on that. Also, no cases on board yet. But what to do? Because if it's on board, then now we are in the lucky situation. If no one has it, no one will get it. But then it will be the other way around. When one person has it, you can wait for the rest.
Yeah.
The ship is such a small community.
Yeah, that's true. Many problems. And we have another question from Dimitris Moliudis, which is also sort of circling around commercial implications and also insurance. And you may or may not be able to answer it, but the question is, as it appears that P&I policies will not cover many of the possible COVID-19 consequences in case of delays due to crew illness, etc., are you considering supplemental or amended insurance cover? Matt?
I think the P&I guidance is very clear, and the focus is on supporting the individual with regard to if he's on board, that there's cover, P&I cover, if there's COVID-19. If he goes home or she goes home and contracts COVID-19, he or she is also covered medically. The commercial consequences, as Marco mentioned, that is a real minefield which we will need to consider and do consider, but it's not as clear. The P&I clubs are very clear on looking after the seafarer, but when it comes to the commercial aspects, it's not so clear, and perhaps this is where there will be legal challenge in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah.
Marco?
Well, maybe if someone from any P&I club is joining us on this webinar, maybe they can give us a little direction, a little bit clue on this, because this is also one of the things that will. Now we are really focusing on the problem itself, and then we will have the aftermath. What will be there, and this will be also one of the big things. And I also have no clue.
Yeah, I can almost guarantee that the whole question about insurance and who picks up the bill for all these extra costs is going to be the topic of discussion for a long time ahead. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a PIMCO webinar to address that particular aspect. Just a few current charter parties, but at least for future charter parties, BIMCO has developed a couple of clauses that actually help distribute the risks in cases like this. There's a clause called infectious diseases clause for both time charter and voyage charter parties that talks about cost related to management of the added health risk and so on. And then there's another clause which is perhaps even more important in the current scenario, and that is the BIMCO liberty and deviation clause for contracts of carriage. And this clause actually contains an allocation of risk when it comes to crew change and so on. So for those of you who are working with the charter parties on a daily basis, it might be worth to have a look at that. Let me just see what else we have. Questions coming in here. We have a question from Gerhard Beiso. Thank you, sirs, for sharing. Would like to clarify what was stated earlier. Is there a third-party provider focused solely in providing advice on what actions to take regarding COVID-19, and then in brackets, port state controls, SOP, etc.? Shall we give that to Matt?
I think the first part of the question is easier. Yeah, there are professional bodies out there that can provide medical advice to masters on board if there are symptoms on board, and that advice is for us is very comforting. That the right temporary care is taken on board the ship until the vessel can get into port. So there are several that I know of, good organizations, physician advisory services that are available that can offer that guidance. I'm not so sure about the second part of the question.
No, I think the question was more like, is there let me just see, is there a third-party provider focused solely in providing advice on what actions to take regarding COVID-19? And I think that it covers more or less all of the things that we've talked about today. And the question is there a sole provider? There is no sole provider. I mean, no. This disease is affecting the whole world and all industries and all sectors. And I think everybody who has a management role and who has a role as a voice in an industry or in a sector, they are now working full steam to provide guidance to their members. And for obvious reasons, there will be a lot of overlap and there will be a lot of development in this guidance as more experience is gained. And so my best advice to you all is to keep track of developments using the BIMCO website. We have 3 people who sit here and do nothing else but non-stop keeping that up to date with the latest developments on all the new guidance that comes out, developments in different ports. What are the restrictions in terms of people movement in and out and so on. So this is a comprehensive source of knowledge. That said, I mean, there is so much guidelines and knowledge being pushed out right now, so there may well also be other relevant sources. And when it comes to all the insurance related and contractual aspects of the whole problem, the best advice is, and you would know this already, your shipping people, is to really maintain a close contact with all your stakeholders and to avoid surprises in the contractual relationship. Make sure that you discuss these things and you can agree way ahead if at all possible, because in the end that saves a lot of trouble for everybody. I don't know, Matt or Marco, do you have anything to add to that, Marco?
If you talk about this, say the purely medical part, you can also go to the World Health Organization where it all starts. And most of these things they come via, so say BIMCO, or when we have suspicious cases, we go to radio medical advice. So it's not really one party you're talking with, but at least in, let's say, the source, most of it, the information comes from the same source. And when you get it from this side or from that side, I don't think that is so important. But for the other things, like operational things, like the legal things, the commercial things, it's all different. And I think it's even when you talk about charter parties, it still is what kind of charter party do you have, what kind of cargo is it, how is your relation with your customer. I think these are the things that you also have, irrespectively whether it's about COVID or it's about just a dispute about damage or about whatever. So I think it will be more or less like that. And I don't think you can from the start say you should do it like this or like that. It's depending on say the part of the problem.
All right, thanks a lot, Marco. And looking at the time, we have now come to the end of the road. I'm sure that we could have continued all day, but time doesn't allow, I'm afraid. So here towards the end, I just want to give our two panelists, first of all, my warmest thanks, and then, of course, the opportunity to just round off the webinar. First, Matt, and then Marco.
First of all, Jakob and the BIMCO team, we're very grateful for the opportunity to participate here today, but also for the hard work that goes on behind the scenes with updating the regulations and guidance documents. So thank you for that. But my final word here is for everyone on this webinar, is that the current COVID-19 policy as applied to shipping is a potentially disastrous own goal that threatens not only the mental health and human rights of seafarers, but also the viability of ocean supply chains on which those in lockdown depend. At present, there are more than 100,000 seafarers in industry that are in effect marooned at sea because of coronavirus shutdowns worldwide that are preventing them from entering or transiting countries or finding flights on which to return home. And this is my plea to the industry. We all need to urge immediate governmental and intergovernmental actions to enable the resumption of crew changes, including the designation of seafarers as key workers. The status quo is not sustainable. So let's work together on this. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you, Matt. And Marco, any closing remarks from you?
Yes, I agree with Matt that I think this is something that we should do all together. It's not the different companies, it's not the people on the fleet or in the office, or it's one thing that we all have the same objectives here. There is no competition. It's just one thing that one goal that we want to do, and that's like we do in BIMCO quite a lot, of course, also with other things. It's one thing we can share our experience. We can come out, we can give sort of a BMP or whatever you want to call it for everybody. So whether you're a large company, whether you're a small company, everybody can take advantage of that. One other thing that I'm quite interested in now is what we see a lot not being possible or not being possible like it was. So a lot of things that were so strict and were more or less, let's say, set in stone are now changing. And that's going to be quite interesting. What will it be like, for instance, remote surveys? What will it be with all kind of evidence that you have to give now physical, but can be done via picture or via other things? That's one of the things. And one of the other things that I see, and that's my interpretation, but we see that the whole shipping industry is now becoming more in a positive light. People are seeing what shipping is doing, what we do, how many things we take from one part of the world to the other part, because that also is so strange. Everybody wants that the ships sail, that everything is as normal as it is. Only the people who sail the ships are in a different position. So the ship is welcome, so to say, a little bit exaggerated, but the people are not. And that's one thing everybody has to consider, I think.
Many thanks for that, Marco. And thanks to both our panelists and indeed also all the audience for making this a good and informative webinar about our current challenges with COVID-19. Before we close the webinar, allow me just to advertise that we have another webinar coming up. The title is Coronavirus Crisis and the Trade War in a Post-Pandemic World. And this is looking more at the economic impact of the whole coronavirus challenge. And from the BIMCO side, our chief shipping analyst, Peter Sand, will participate in this webinar. And you can find the details about this webinar in the BIMCO website. With that, we've come to an end. Thank you very much for your attendance and stay safe out there.